people have a deep connection to music. We simply can't imagine ourselves without it. Our national culture is something we're proud of, something that makes us unique. After the October Revolution, we could have lost a huge part of this heritage. Our akyns, epics, and termies were passed down by word of mouth, never written down, and Soviet ideology dismissed such traditional art as outdated remnants of feudal bourgeois past. Efforts were made to erase it, pushing Soviet patriotism in its place.
Творчество пережитком феодально-буржуазного строя и делало все, чтобы придать его забвению, заменив его в сознании людей на советское.
But we have one man to thank for saving this legacy, Aleksandr Zatayevich. A self-taught musician, he became captivated by our music, devoting his life to it. He traveled to even the most remote villages, painstakingly recording each kuy and song. This dedication resulted in the collection 1,000 Songs of the Kazakh people, a one-of-a-kind masterpiece that has immortalized his name.
Песен казахского народа. Уникальная работа, увековечившая имя своего создателя.
Could young Sasha Zatayevich, a music lover born in the remote uyezd of Bolkhov in Russia's Oryol Governorate, ever have imagined that fate would one day carry him to the Kazakh steppes? That these vast plains under endless blue skies filled with the scent of wildflowers and grasses would become so close to his heart that he'd entwine his entire life and creative journey with them? His passion for music from an early age, growing up in a family of career military officers, was a bit of an oddity, not exactly met with open arms. His grandfather had fought in the Napoleonic Wars, and his father, a decorated hero of the Crimean War, had a service dress uniform literally covered in medals for bravery and courage. Unfortunately, his father passed away, leaving Alexander at just 8 years of age. His grandfather stepped in, taking him under his wing and sending him to a military academy, where Alexander graduated with honors. Yet in his heart, he dreamed of studying music at a conservatory. It would be a long time before Alexander's dream came true. After his father's death, the family's situation grew steadily worse, and there was hardly enough money to get by. So Alexander decided to head to his ancestral homeland in Poland. There he took a job as an advisor to the Governor General of Warsaw. He sent every penny he earned back to his family in Bolkhov, barely managing to get by himself. But it didn't seem to trouble him much. He was fully absorbed in the cultural and musical scene around him.
Службу при городском генерал-губернаторстве Затаевич.
In addition to his role at the Governor General's office, Zatayevich worked as a music critic and editor for a magazine. He was a true professional, sharp-witted, with a keen eye for detail, and always fair in his assessments. Before long, his reviews and articles earned him widespread recognition, not just in Poland but internationally. Newspapers and magazines across the world began to publish his work, and he quickly gained a following far beyond his homeland.
Выходит новая опера в Варшаве. Затаевич по частям разбирает.
A new opera is being performed in Warsaw, and Zatayevich breaks it down. Piece by piece, he examines every detail. He critiques the director's work, the lighting crew, and the performance of each instrument in the orchestra. He hears every subtle nuance, the breath of the second violins, the singers, and compares their replacements. And what does it mean? It's when, say, a new singer steps in to replace a regular cast member, someone perhaps from a small town, or maybe from St. Petersburg.
Может быть, глубинка или наоборот приезжает из Петербурга, и молодой человек, которому было...
This young man, who had little to his name back then, approached his task with such passion and sophistication. His reviews were sharp and insightful. I'd even say they were superb examples of journalism, pieces that would stand proudly alongside the best of today's writing.
Можно спокойно ставить вровень с той журналистикой, которая сейчас есть.
Чиновник, который занимался музыкой для собственного удовольствия, музицировал, он превратился в очень крупного музыканта.
The official who once played music just for his own pleasure eventually became a great musician. He wasn't just a composer writing small piano pieces, he was a well-connected musician, conversing with the leading composers of the time. He also worked as a music critic, attending concerts and deeply involved in the musical life of Russia. Zatayevich's next venture was as an impresario, and he quickly forged close ties with the cultural elite, including Russia's finest. He organized concerts for the stars of the day: Shaliapin, Sabinov, Buyukli, Battistini, Danilin, and Scriabin. But in 1897, one encounter would profoundly shape his life. He met the extraordinary composer Sergei Rachmaninov. Like many classical music lovers of his time, Zatayevich was captivated by Rachmaninov's music and stunning skill. From then on, he didn't miss a single one of his concerts. One day, on a whim, he decided to write to Rachmaninov, mentioning that he also composed music and even sent a few of his pieces along, with no real hope of hearing back. To his amazement, Rachmaninov responded warmly.
From a letter by Sergei Rachmaninov to Aleksandr Zatayevich, 1896.
Хочу вам сказать, что полчаса назад мне попались на глаза ваши мазурки.
Just half an hour ago, I came across your mazurkas, played them, and enjoyed them very much. You have real talent. I'd love it if you could send me more of your work now and then, or at least drop me a line to let me know if you're still composing. My advice to you is to keep at it. Forgive me if I seem too eager, but I genuinely liked your work.
Zatayevich was absolutely thrilled. He felt on top of the world and dove headfirst into composing new works. Their initial correspondence soon turned into a close friendship, as both were young and equally obsessed with music. It was Zatayevich who supported Rachmaninov during his darkest times. When Rachmaninov's first symphony was a critical flop, it was Zatayevich he confided in, sharing his struggles and doubts.
Так вот, Рахманинов ни с кем не делился своими бедами, а вот в этом письме Затаевича поделился.
Rachmaninov rarely opened up about his struggles, but in this letter to Zatayevich he did. He went into depth about how it all went wrong, wondering aloud, "I can't believe Glazunov is a poor conductor." He wasn't putting the blame on Glazunov, though. He speculated that perhaps his symphony was too intricate or unusual and required a special kind of synergy with the conductor.
Особый контакт с автором, просто, может быть, они с Глазуновым так это вот подробно не обсудили. Может быть, было мало репетиций. Вот поэтому. Но, пишет он...
Maybe they hadn't had enough time to prepare together, or maybe there simply weren't enough rehearsals. Yet he concluded with determination, saying, "I plan to keep working on this symphony, refine it, and eventually bring it to life." This wasn't just a letter, it was a heartfelt sharing of his creative aspirations. Then, in 1908, when Zatayevich was established in Warsaw as a critic for musical leaflet, Rachmaninov returned to perform his second symphony and suite.
Критиком журнала «Музыкальный листок», писал там свои критические статьи. Туда опять приехал на концерт Рахманинов, который исполнял вторую симфонию, вторую сюиту.
The concert was nothing short of a triumph. Zatayevich's review, preserved in his archives, captures the unforgettable atmosphere of the event. He described how Warsaw went wild for Rachmaninov, the ovations, the bouquets, and the special gift they'd arranged for him, a grand clock with a chiming tower, chosen because everyone knew how much Rachmaninov loved clocks.
Поднесли венки, и ему подарили часы, огромные часы с башенным боем, зная, что Рахманинов любит часы.
Дружба с Сергеем Рахманиновым оказала на Затаевича огромное влияние.
The friendship with Sergei Rachmaninov had a huge influence on Zatayevich. He dedicated 6 piano miniatures to him, and who knows, he might have written many more. In fact, Zatayevich might have become a famous composer himself. He certainly had the talent, as everyone, including Rachmaninov, recognized. But it wasn't meant to be. The First World War changed everything, shifting the course of millions of lives, including Zatayevich's. By the time the First World War began, Aleksandr Zatayevich had already started his own family. His wife Nadezhda was an intelligent, devoted woman who wholeheartedly dedicated herself to her husband and children. She became both his muse and his closest companion, surrounding him with love and care. In turn, he affectionately called her Mommy. When the First World War broke out, the Zatayevich family was living in Warsaw and barely survived a bombing. The German airstrikes left thousands of people homeless, and the Zatayevichs were among them. The once beautiful city of Warsaw was left in ruins. Looking for a better life, the family moved to Petrograd, where he threw himself into his work again, day in and day out, in a committee dedicated to helping those affected. Although he didn't see the light, he held on to hope for better days. What he didn't know was that the toughest trials were yet to come. In 1917, the revolution hit. October 1917 changed everything. The city and the country fell under Bolshevik rule, and what had once seemed unshakable began to fall apart. The monarchy collapsed, and with it, the Russian Empire was no more. He sent his family to Orenburg and headed to Moscow to make a living. But Moscow, after the revolution, was different, cold, bleak, and dangerous. How can there be talk of music? Zatayevich found work as a financial inspector in the railway department of the People's Bank, but the country's crisis only deepened, and by April 1920 the bank shut down. Zatayevich was left in despair, out of work, uncertain about the future, and separated from his family. He sent his wife long letters and short telegrams full of worry.
From a letter by Aleksandr Zatayevich to his wife, November the 10th, 1917. My dear Mummy, I haven't heard from you in ages, and I'm so worried. I saw in the newspaper that clashes are expected between the troops and Cossacks in Orenburg. Please be careful and stay off the streets during these tense days.
The time came when staying in Moscow became unbearable. Zatayevich went to Orenburg to his family. It was in Orenburg, which had become the capital of the Kazakh ASSR in 1920, that his new life began. Here he found his true calling and a new homeland. But before that could happen, he would face the brink of survival. Alongside the Kazakh people, he survived the first wave of the famine of the 1920s, a consequence of the Bolshevik reforms. In 1920, Lenin introduced the new economic policy, shifting from grain requisitioning to a produce tax. Essentially, peasants were forced to give up to 70% of their grain and livestock. People either perished or fled to neighboring China. The Zatayevich family was also on the brink of survival. He likely would have died too, if not for the most crucial meeting of his life. Ahmed Baitursynov. Back then, he had been appointed by Lenin as the Commissar of Education. Yes, right after the revolution, despite being ideological opponents, the Bolsheviks did not destroy the Alash Orda because there was no one else who could work in the fields of education, science, and medicine. There would have been no one to create textbooks or rebuild schools and universities. All of this was accomplished by educated and enlightened individuals. Lenin granted them amnesty, promising that there would be no persecution. Ahmed Baitursynov was on the lookout for talent and quickly recognized Zatayevich's musical gift.
As a passionate lover and expert of folk songs, a gifted performer, and a skilled Dombra player, Baitursunov is justly held in high regard by his fellow countrymen. He always showed immense respect for my work, and not only did he regularly share with me all the songs he knew, whether from Torgay, Kostanay, Aktaber, Bokeh or Karkaroli, but he also gave me two remarkable cues for the Dombra. Beyond that, his authoritative insights into Kazakh history and ethnography were invaluable in helping me navigate the vast material I had gathered. For all of this, I will always remain deeply grateful to him.
Вот эти мотивы, которые собраны Затаевичем, они сегодня являются основой.
The motifs Zatayevich collected have become the foundation of many of our composers' works. And why are they so familiar to us? Because these composers often incorporate these motifs into their music. If he hadn't gathered these songs, they might have been lost over time. Thankfully, we were able to preserve them, and now we honor them for the invaluable contribution they've made. These songs, which served as the inspiration for countless new pieces, continue to live on today, whether in opera houses, theaters, or musicals, where performers bring these melodies to life on various stages.
Драматических театров, в разных мюзиклах, на разных сценах исполнителями эти мелодии сейчас используются.
He introduced him to other prominent figures of the Kazakh intellectual community like Alikhan Bokikhanov, Mirshakib Dulatov, and Maghjan Jumabayev. It was as if they sensed the urgency of preserving Kazakh music at that moment, to transcribe the cues and epics that had been passed down orally into music notation, ensuring that this rich heritage would not be lost. Here's what Mirshakib Dulatov's daughter Gulnar had to say about this.
Ну и вот когда он пришел и говорит: Гая, ты спой мне, пожалуйста, песню, которую тебе по душе.
One day he came over and said, Gaia, could you please sing me a song that you really love? So my mom sang Ush Dos, a Kazakh folk song.
Берет эту свою нотную тетрадь и мелодию.
As soon as she finished, he pulled out his notebook and started writing down the melody. The next day, Zatayevich promised to visit the Baitursunovs, who lived nearby. So my mom and I walked over through the dog garden, and my dad, coming from work, met us there.
Затаевич младше был Байтурсунова, и он уже, знаете, как-то перед ним, как младший.
Zatayevich arrived too. He was younger than Baitursunov, so he treated him with a certain respect. But with my dad being older, he spoke informally, like they were close friends. When we gathered at the Baitursunovs, Baitursunov sang a few songs, and Zatayevich wrote them all down. Then he sat at the piano and played them.
Вот он это все записал, а потом уже и воспроизвел, прям сел и сыграл на пианино.
The first song he ever recorded and preserved was Akhau Simei. Why this song, you might ask? It's not surprising, really. Simei was the first capital of independent Kazakhstan, and before the revolution, it was the cultural center of the Kazakh people. In 1917, Alikhan Bokikhanov declared the city the heart of the Alash autonomy. As for Zatayevich's payment for his first musical notations, it was substantial. He received 2 pounds of bread. He discovered a world of new sounds, the Kazakh folk instruments, the melodies he'd never heard before, and those deeply moving, soul-stirring tunes ignited a true sense of passion in him. He sought them out like precious gems, and every discovery filled him with the joy of a child. He hardly ever let go of his notebook and pencil.
How could I simply walk past those treasures that had so unexpectedly opened up before me? To the wider world of culture, they were still completely unknown, yet they were already at risk of being lost forever. I had to act fast to capture what remained, wrote Aleksandr Viktorovich, summing up his 4 years of work collecting and transcribing Kazakh tunes and melodies, which were published in Moscow in March 1925.
Вот интересно, что Александр Викторович не упускал ни одной возможности.
What's particularly striking is that Aleksandr Viktorovich never passed up an opportunity to record a song, regardless of whether the source was a professional or not.
Писал всех подряд, кого только можно было, от кого только можно было.
He wrote down anyone he could, gathering information from every possible informant. This approach played a key role in unveiling the full panorama of Kazakh folk culture.
Казахского, сказать, этноса, с одной стороны, а с другой стороны,
On one hand, it broadened the scope of what was known, and on the other, it revealed a treasure trove of material, filled with absolute gems, amazing, unforgettable pieces. Over time, he began to see and recognize this richness. He paid close attention to it. In fact, it seems to me that Zatayevich was the first to realize that Kazakh folk art was not just about folk traditions, but also about an incredibly high level of professional oral culture. He was the first to highlight this distinction, especially in the best examples.
Именно Затаевич это отметил впервые неоднократно в лучших образцах.
What truly captivated Zatayevich were the akyns. Their incredible ability to create both music and lyrics on the spot in just 5 minutes amazed him. Zatayevich developed a deep affection for the heartfelt and musical Kazakh people, and in turn, they grew fond of him as well. He became truly famous, and his reputation and noble mission spread throughout Orenburg. People came to him in droves, bringing with them the treasures of their oral traditions, treasures from which he created lasting works of art.
Much like in their spoken language, Kazakhs are born appreciators and lovers of eloquence. Even today, their culture is brimming with improvisers who can effortlessly turn any topic into a lengthy, meaningful verse, filled with sharp rhythm and resonant rhymes.
Что смог ухватить Затаевич, он смог рассказать о том, что это
What did Zatayevich manage to capture? He was able to portray the improvisational nature of the culture, where creativity unfolded on the spot. As he describes it, everyone was an improviser. For instance, two travelers meet in the steppe, and, as Zatayevich writes, they greet each other with impromptu poetry and music.
Стихами и музыкой. Мать ругает ребенка не просто так, она тут же складывает.
A mother scolds her child, but not just with words. She immediately turns her reprimand into a song. Or at a gathering of workers, the event often begins with someone stepping up and improvising verses and melodies.
Он с восторгом об этом пишет, и он перечисляет жанры.
He writes about all of this with awe. He also lists the many genres he encountered while transcribing music, dedicating nearly a page to them. The musical culture was so rich, both in terms of variety and genres.
Была богата музыкальная культура и жанрово тоже.
Epidemics, typhus and cholera would flare up across various parts of Kazakhstan, and in 1921, Orenburg wasn't spared. Zatayevich's family fell ill with his wife and children recovering, but he came dangerously close to death. He was bedridden with fever for days, losing consciousness, yet even during brief moments of respite, he would grab his pencil as if afraid he wouldn't have enough time to finish.
From a letter by Romain Roland. First of all, he wrote, "I must express my admiration for the incredible energy you showed in completing your monumental work despite the dire circumstances of hunger and epidemics. It's a musical triumph, a true testament to your inner strength, one that will never be forgotten."
как муками и упорным трудом среди бури политических катаклизмов.
This book, A Thousand Songs of the Kazakh People, was born out of hardship and tireless work amidst political storms and upheavals. Published in 1925, it not only immortalized its creator but also became a priceless part of Kazakhstan's heritage. Sifulin, Shanin, Bokikhanov, Aymautov, Kazakhstan's leading intellectuals, all worked closely with Zatayevich, sharing everything they discovered. It seemed as if there was no song left in the steppe that he hadn't captured. Alongside these musical gems, he discovered remarkable performers among the Kazakh people, uncovering their talents and helping new stars emerge. Isa Bayzakov, Kali Bayzhanov, and Amre Kashaubayev, who thanks to Zatayevich's advocacy was even invited to perform at the World's Fair in Paris. This is how Kazakh songs reached the world stage. For his work, Zatayevich was honored as the first people's artist of the Kazakh ASSR.
Почему? Потому что история Амре показывает.
Why? Because Amre's stories shows just how remarkable Aleksandr Zatayevich was at spotting the hidden gems in the steppes. He had a knack for finding talents long before they were recognized, capturing their songs in his notebook.
Моментально писал в своей огромной тетрадке. Он записывал, как только встречался с этими.
Picture this. It's the 1920s, and a young Kanish Satpayev, not yet a celebrated academic, just a student, is sitting in Zatayevich's modest little room, sharing melodies that Zatayevich eagerly writes down.
И Каныш Сатпаев, сидит в каморке у Затаевича и диктует ему песни.
Затем за 5 лет, он собрал вот эту тысячу.
In just 5 years, he managed to gather 1,000 songs. How? But in a way, it makes sense. Orenburg, where he worked, was alive with music everywhere you went. In dorms, canteens, clubs, on the streets, music filled the air, and finding people to share their songs was almost effortless. Nearly everyone he encountered was a musician in some form, reflecting the Kazakh people's deep connection to music.
Но есть момент такой как бы неразборчивости, но он преследовал целью не...
At first, Zatayevich wasn't focused on selecting only the finest talents. He simply wanted to capture the spirit of this rich musical landscape. He knew that careful selection process could come later. Over time, as he immersed himself in this abundance of material, he began to identify pieces of exceptional quality and artistry.
Образцы высочайшей пробы через исполнительское мастерство. И вот тогда появились его заметки.
That's when he began to record the names of Kazakh musical icons like Barzhan, Akan, and Muhit, the singers, and instrumentalists like Kurmangazi, Daulet Karey, Ikolas, and Kazangap.
Пошла градация на исполнительские школы, традиции и прочее.
He began to see distant schools, traditions, and unique styles of performance. And through his careful notes and observations, he laid the foundation for Kazakh musicology. Through this vast collection, he revealed the extraordinary richness of Kazakh musical culture.
Складывалась эта картина необъятного богатства музыкальной культуры Казахстана, этнической.
As the years passed, Zatayevich, though no longer young and with his health failing, showed no signs of slowing down. He pressed on with his journey across Kazakhstan, even heading to its most remote corners.
From a letter by Aleksandr Zatayevich to his wife, Karkaroli, August 1926. I met incredible people, heard beautiful songs, and saw some truly amazing scenes in nature. Wolves, flocks of eagles and hawks, the stunning flower-covered mountains. But sleeping on the ground, spending 2 nights in the open steppe, the summer heat, the exhausting work of transcribing songs, and the constant strain have made everything feel so much harder. It's painful to get up, painful to lie down.
He never complained to anyone. It was only in letters to his wife that he would mention the harsh conditions and discomfort he faced. But the musical treasures he uncovered never failed to amaze him, fueling his energy and motivation to keep going.
Первая-то тысяча в основном была собрана им в Оренбурге, Семипалатинский. А потом вот...
The first collection, the 1000 songs, was primarily compiled in Orenburg and Semey. But after publishing it, he embarked on a journey across Kazakhstan.
Поразительное вообще. Это был подвиг. Это тряска в телеге, это холод, это...
That journey was truly extraordinary. A real feat. The bumpy ride in the cart, cold, hunger, and epidemics, working and traveling in such harsh conditions, was a monumental task.
Видимо, стремление, граничащее просто с фанатизмом. Собрать еще, найти.
To keep moving, to keep pushing forward, he must have had enormous obsessive drive, a relentless determination to gather more and discover even more. His trip to western Kazakhstan, Kazakh, and the southern regions was an immense challenge under dreadful circumstances. But the results were absolutely staggering.
Однако во втором сборнике «500 песен akyns» Затаевич уже...
In his second collection, 500 songs and cues, Zatayevich had already become a seasoned music ethnographer. He had gained wealth of knowledge, and his second volume of songs was much more polished. Zatayevich also made a point of transcribing the lyrics. Modern Kazakh traditional musicians often say that by studying his recordings and understanding the musical language he used, they can recreate how the traditional musicians performed for him. Zatayevich's contribution to preserving the traditions of Kazakh spiritual and musical culture is truly remarkable.
Очень большое.
Наша, как говорится, казахская идентичность проявляется в этих песнях. И поэтому мы без этой идентичности...
Our Kazakh identity, as they say, is embodied in these songs. Without it, we wouldn't have a culture or even know our own songs and melodies. So we are deeply grateful to him for gathering and preserving all of this for our people. It's now our duty to pass it on to future generations. The early 1930s, the brutal machinery of repression began to gain momentum. While arrests were still rare, they were becoming increasingly high-profile. And soon, dark clouds gathered over Zatayevich. An anonymous tip was sent to the NKVD, accusing him of having participated in the suppression of workers' protests while working in Poland under the general government. It was a grave charge.
Вот этот скандал, который был связан с его именем, раздул его какой-то сексот, который нашел материал на него.
The scandal tied to his name was blown up by some informant who found material on him and claimed that the assistant to the governor of Warsaw had likely been involved in the 1905 workers' massacre. Just imagine, this kind of accusation was exactly what the NKVD agents were hoping for. They were itching to find the so-called Tsarist henchman.
Zatayevich was only able to avoid arrest thanks to the intervention and backing of Maxim Gorky. Gorky vouched for the musician, and the case was postponed, though it was never dismissed. In 1936, Kazakhstan was gearing up for a major event, the first decade of Kazakh art in Moscow. Leading the charge was Timirbek Shurgenov, the People's Commissar for Education. The troupe had been rehearsing for months, and when the time came, they performed the operas Kazhibek and Jalbir at the Bolshoi Theater to resounding success, with Zatayevich's recordings as the foundation. The the music of Evgeny Brusilovsky, Gabit Musrepov's libretto, the exceptional voices of opera stars like Kulyash Bayseitova, Kanabek Bayseitov, and Kurmanbek Janjarbekov, Shara Zhienkulova's grace and beauty created a sensational performance that had Moscow buzzing with excitement. But Zatayevich was not invited to the decade. By then he lived in Moscow, having been transferred there by a government decree, and was traveling for his expeditions.
Его кто-то увидел, не помню, Брусиловский или кто, перед.
Someone, maybe it was Brusilovsky, I don't remember, saw him standing outside the building. He couldn't get in because he hadn't been invited. He didn't have an invitation. It was a heartbreaking moment. He stood there, crying, overwhelmed by an immense sense of hurt, but he wasn't the type to get offended easily. He had a remarkably delicate and refined nature.
Но 1936 год пожинал свои плоды не только этим. Перед декадой, которая прошла летом в Москве,
But the year 1936 brought more than just the success of the Kazakh arts decade. Before the event took place in Moscow, Kazpravda published a strange article. Someone had written a scathing piece claiming that Zatayevich's earlier work wasn't just inaccurate, but poorly done, almost incompetent. To this day, no one knows who was behind it.
И я представляю, когда эту вырезку из газеты принесли Александру Викторовичу, он был уже довольно-таки пожилым, и
It was a real blow to Zatayevich. I can only imagine how it must have felt when he saw that clipping. By then, he was already quite elderly, and reading accusations that he hadn't used modern recording techniques with phonograph reels in the 1920s must have been heart-wrenching.
Александр Викторович в своих письмах и в переписках с друзьями, он пытается отвечать, но его никто не слушал, конечно, никто не напечатал.
In his letters and conversations with friends, he tried to explain, but no one was listening. Naturally, his side of the story wasn't printed. But here's the thing. Those phonograph reels were made from a special compound that melted in the heat. And in the vastness of Kazakhstan steppes, the phonograph would only work if the temperature dropped below 15 Celsius degrees. In the summer, and even in October, much of Kazakhstan was unbearably hot, which is why Zatayevich couldn't use that method of recording.
В октябре во многих частях Казахстана очень жарко, и Александр Викторович не применял этот способ записи.
Aleksandr Viktorovich was devastated and overwhelmed. Little did he know that the worst was yet to come, that his allies, those who had supported his work and contributed so much to the creation of the unique collection, would soon be labeled enemies of the people and executed. The collection itself would be censored and the names of those who fell out of favor with the regime erased. It was the end of 1936. By Tursinov, Bokikhanov, Zhurgenov, Shanin, Zhumabayev, and many others, in total the number of arrests in Kazakhstan would reach 105,000, with over 22,000 sentenced to death. The steppe, which Zatayevich had once cherished, would soon be soaked in blood, transforming from a symbol of freedom into a land of exile and imprisonment. During the years of repression, more than 5 million people would be deported to camps across Kazakhstan. But Aleksandr Zatayevich would never see that. He would die in a tragic accident. On November 22nd, 1936, he sent a telegram from Frunze to his wife in Moscow. "I'll be arriving on Thursday. Please meet me and bring a fur coat, as I don't have any outerwear." However, due to inexperience or oversight, the telegraph operator mistakenly replaced Thursday with the 4th, meaning December 4th instead. As a result, no one was at the station to meet him. With a bitter cold setting in, Zatayevich struggled to make his way home, where he couldn't warm up for hours. He fell ill, and exactly 10 days later, Zatayevich passed away.
Вам, мои дорогие друзья-джигиты, посвящаю. И вам возвращаю я этот труд, сработанный совместно с вами.
I dedicate this work to you, my dear friends, and I return it to you, created together in times of hunger, cold, and epidemics. You know that it is not I who collect your beautiful folk songs, but you with my help, gathering them to protect this national treasure from being lost or distorted. So preserve, study, and enrich your cultural heritage, and enhance it with the greatest achievements of universal human culture.